I want to turn in a moment to a clip of an interview I did with Imprison Sen, who's the wife of Dr. Binayak Sen, who's sort of the most well-known figure in India who's been arrested under these terror laws that you just mentioned. But before that, I want to ask you about a few states in central India where the BJP actually did win, and these are largely states with large indigenous or Adivasi or tribal populations. Can you explain why the BJP won here and set up the situation of Binayak Sen before we go to the clip?
Yes, Anjali, I think for many months to come, people will be analyzing this over and over. To repeat, I think the mandate is very clearly for the Congress at the national level, but what exactly the mandate means needs to be discussed at some length. In the mineral belt, which is right from Gujarat, right through Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh to Jharkhand and parts of Orissa, the BJP has actually held on to almost all of its seats with a little bit of a loss in Madhya Pradesh. This also happens to be the place where 75 million Adivasis or Aboriginal groups, most of them live in this region. So a combination of minerals that can be extracted with super profits at a very large cost to the indigenous people, this is where the BJP government has consistently shown that it is capable of massive state repression and definitely many forms of fascism that are right now on the ground. Right here, the mandate of the people is not very clear to me. And we should not read this as a loss for the BJP. It is definitely clipped their wings a little bit and showed them that they're not the great national party that they are. As far as a popular vote goes, both the Congress and the BJP have more or less held on to about 50 to 60% of their votes and the seats. So we have to be very clear what this is.
Well, moving on to Binayak Sen, last week marked the second anniversary of the detention of the internationally recognized award-winning human rights activist Dr. Binayak Sen, who's worked as a public health professional in the central Indian state of Chhattisgarh for 25 years. He was arrested on May 14, 2007 for allegedly helping the Maoist, also known as the Naxalite insurgency in the state, and detained under one of India's most draconian laws, the Chhattisgarh Special Public Security Act. He's the national vice president of the People's Union for Civil Liberties, or the PUCL. He's been denied bail and medical treatment despite his worsening health. I spoke to his wife, Imprison Sen, on Sunday.
I think he was the loudest voice of dissent against the excesses that the government was committing in the name of so-called anti-Naxal operations. And it's a very complex situation in which the anti-Naxal operations are also taking place in the districts which are mineral rich and where a lot of finance capital is supposed to come in. MOUs have been signed and people's land is to be acquired. And people are resisting land acquisition under these conditions. Many villages have refused to give consent. I mean, in tribal areas, scheduled areas, Gram Sabha is supposed to give consent. Many villages have refused to do that, and they have been coerced in so many ways. The Salva Jurum, which is a flagship program of the Chhattisgarh government's anti-Naxal operations, the government proclaims it as a peaceful people's movement, but actually it is fully supported, funded, sponsored by the government. People are armed by the government to commit all kinds of excesses on people who are supposed to be Naxal sympathizers. So Binayak was the loudest voice of dissent against that. So that is why he in particular. The laws under which he was charged, initially we had no idea. It was a third person who was arrested, who was supposed to have had some letters, which Binayak, during some of his jail visits, is supposed to have couriered out of the jail. So it was a very complex kind of a scenario which they built up. And ultimately, they charged him with sedition, waging war against the state of India, and criminal conspiracy, etc., etc., etc. So these are very, very serious charges. These are the charges that were applied on Bhagat Singh, who was hanged for waging war against India before independence.
Can you describe the work that Dr. Binayak Sen and you have been doing in Chhattisgarh?
We have been in Chhattisgarh for over a quarter of a century. And we worked with people's organizations, with trade unions, and with Adivasi tribal groups. And one of the key tenets of whatever we have done is that we have tried to give control to the people over their own lives in the kind of development that they would like to have, and whatever programs, service programs, health, education. We've tried to build it around the priorities of local communities. We've tried to validate and document sustainable agriculture, the agrobiodiversity that people have, and tried to build up food security programs around that. Binayak's particular area of interest was food security and nutrition, because nutrition was a subject that was very close to him, right from his time when he was studying. His dissertation when he was doing his MD was on nutrition, malnutrition, nutrition. So food security was one area, and the other was training health workers in primary health care and in tackling killer diseases, which are very prominently and very sort of not very complicated disease patterns, but malaria is a killer, malignant self-spelling malaria. So how to develop systems in which diagnosis, people with very little formal education can diagnose, can treat, and streamlining these systems. That was his major area of work.
And what are you calling for now? What is the Binayak Sen campaign calling for? What are the main demands?
The Binayak Sen campaign in particular, I think, is calling for his release and for his currently also trying to facilitate his medical treatment, because that is a serious issue. But at the same time, the Binayak Sen campaign is also drawing attention to all that is happening in Chhattisgarh, to the issue of human rights defenders, to the issue of Adivasi rights, people's right to have the kind of development that they want. So it is raising a large number of wider issues to which Binayak's arrest is connected. But at the same time, I think the central demand is for Binayak's
The voice of Ilina Sen, the wife of Dr. Binayak Sen, who's been arrested in India in detention for 2 years now. I also want to thank Balamurli Natarajan, Assistant Professor of Anthropology at William Patterson University in New Jersey. And we'll go now to Amy in Philadelphia.